it's our 500th episode. Harry, I want to thank you so much for all you have done to bring in the larger community to understand what MPTF is and how we joyfully create this space, this safe space for performance and art. Let me hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I want to start off by saying congratulations to the Creative Chaos team on your 500th show, an astounding number. Thanks for the superlative work that everyone at MPTF Studios has done. Thank you for encouraging me in March of 2020 to do a poetry show. Today is our 159th show. My purposes in doing a 1-hour weekly poetry show are to present excellent poetry read by excellent readers who are MPTF readers, including Corinne Conley, Helen Richman, Weissman, to invite splendid outside poets, Phoebe McAdams, Beth Ruscio, D.A. Powell, among them, to read their poetry, to keep the tradition alive and show innovations in poetry, to celebrate the possibilities of poetry, to build a community through words. It's important to have a community of poetry so that each poet can go farther. I want to thank Bob Beecher for the many superb shows that he initiated and participated in. I want to end this part by thanking Jennifer Clymer for being a brilliant protective director, and by thanking Jen and Bob Beecher for their loving support of the creatives. Amy Clampitt was born on June 15, 1920, into a family of Quakers and farmers in New Providence, Iowa. As a child, she found happiness in reading and solitude. After graduating from Grinnell College in 1941, she went to New York City, where she worked for Oxford University Press and later for the National Audubon Society. Willard Spiegelman, in his luminous biography, Nothing Stays Put, The Life and Poetry of Amy Clampitt, wrote, quote, "Her poems evince a life engaged with books and in political protest and religious struggle. They are not conventional outpourings. They open up to us a woman deeply connected to the physical world who wrote about nature, landscape, and weather in the most detailed ways. They mingle Keatsian lushness and Quaker austerity." Spiegelman called Amy Clampitt, quote, "one of the patron saints of late bloomers." In 1978, a poem of Amy's was published in the New Yorker. She had a total of 48 poems published in the New Yorker. In 1983, at age 63, she had her first book of poetry published, The Kingfisher. 63 years of obscurity and then fame. 5 books published by Knopf, a MacArthur Genius Grant, late bloomer indeed. Amy lived with Harold Korn, a law professor, for 20 years, who gave her love and protection. She died in 1994. Landscape, she loved to name flora and fauna and birds, and literature are 2 of her themes. She also called herself the poet of displacement. Motion is also apparent in her poetry. Amy Clampitt made a significant contribution to American poetry. The marvelous readers The marvelous actors in order of appearance are Corinne Conley, Kay Weissman, Helen Richman. Here's Corinne Conley.
Amaranth and Moly by Amy Clampitt. The night we bailed out Jolene from Rikers Island, tumbleweeds in such multitudes were blowing through the dark, it might almost have been Wyoming. Built like a willow or a John Held flapper, from the shoulders up, she was pure Nefertiti. And out of that divine brown throat came honey and cockleburs. She had 9 children and no identifiable husband. She wore a headcloth like a tiara above a sack dress improvised from a beach towel. She turned larceny against the bureaucracy into an art form. When they raised the subway fare and simultaneously cut back on human resources, Jolene began jumping turnstiles as a matter of principle. The police caught up with her at approximately her 15th infraction, and the next thing anybody knew, she'd been carried off to the woman's house of D. Now that it's been shifted to the other side of the East River, bailing anybody out becomes an all-night expedition, a backhanded kind of joyride, comparable to crossing the Styx or the Little Bighorn in a second-hand Volkswagen. You enter a region of landfill, hamburger lois, a necropolis of coffee grounds, of desiccated Amaranthus albus, rudely known as pigweed, on the run. No roots. When a tumbleweed takes off, barbed wire won't stop it, much less a holstered guard, or signs reading no unauthorized vehicles beyond this point. A shuttle bus arrives after a while to cart you to the reception area, where people get paid to teach you how to wait with no message, while one shift goes off and the next one comes on, and every half hour or so you feed another batch of change into a payphone, jiggling all the levers of influence you can think of to no effect whatever. At a little after 3 a.m., finally, Jolene came out. The same beautiful, outrageous ginger snap with a whole new catalog of indictments. On the shuttle bus, while a pimp was softly lecturing his sullen girl on what to do next time, Jolene described how the precinct had begun by giving her a psychiatric assessment, for which the city then proceeded to bill her. By the time the van arrived to take her to the house of D, the officer who brought her in the first place was saying, "Jolene, I love you." And she told us, exactly what he could do. All around us in the dark of Rikers Island, the tumbleweeds scurrying were no pigweed, I was thinking, but the amaranth of antiquity. And Jolene was not only amaranth and moly, she was poetry, leaping the turnstiles of another century. The Kingfisher. In a year, the nightingales were said to be so loud they drowned out slumber, and peafowl strolled screaming beside the ruined nunnery through the long evening of a dazzled pub crawl, the halcyon color portholed by those eye spots stunning tapestry, unsettled the pastoral nightfall with amazement's opening. Months later, intermission in a pub on 55th Street found one of them still breathless, the other quizzical, acting the Philistine, punctuating Stravinsky. Tell me, what was that racket in the audience about? Falling down the Firebird, harum-scarum like a kite, a burnished, breathing wreck that didn't hurt at all. Among the Bronx Zoo's exiled jungle fowl, they heard through headphones of a separating panic the bellbird reiterate its single chong, a scream nobody answered. When he mourned, "The poetry is gone," she quailed, seeing how his hands shook, sobered into feeling old. By midnight, yet another fifth would have been killed. A Sunday morning, the November of their cataclysm, Dylan Thomas brought in extremis to St. Vincent's that same week, a symptomatic datum, found them wandering a downtown churchyard. Among its headstones, while from unruined choirs the noise of Christendom poured over Wall Street, a Benison Investments, a late thrush, paused, in transit from some grizzled spruce bog to the humid equatorial fireside, berry-eyed, bark brown above, with dark hints of trauma in the stigmata of its underparts, or so. Too bruised just then to have invented anything so fancy, later re-embroidering in retrospect, she had supposed. In gray England, years of muted recrimination, then dead silence, later. She could not have said how many spoiled takeoffs, how many entanglements gone sodden, how many gaudy evenings made frantic by just one insomniac nightingale, how many liaisons gone down screaming in a stroll beside the ruined nunnery. A kingfisher's burnished plunge, the color of felicity afire, came glancing like an arrow through landscapes of untended memory. Ardor, illuminating with its terrifying currency. Now, no mere glimpse, no porthole vista, but down on down, the uninhabitable sorrow. Black buttercups. In March, the farmer's month for packing up and moving on, the rutted mud potholed with glare. The verb to move connoted nothing natural, such as the shifting of the course of streams or the sun's position, sap moving up, or even couples dancing. What the stripped root exhumed above the mudhole's brittle skin discerned was exile. Exile to raw clapboard, a privy out in the back, a smokehouse built by the pioneers, no shade trees, but a huddle of red cedars, exposure on the highest elevation in the township, a gangling windmill harped on by each indisposition of the weather. The mildewed gurgle of a cistern humped underneath it like a burial. Menace inhabited that water when the pioneers, ending their trek from North Carolina, farther than of the Chaldees had been from Canaan, settled here and tried to root themselves. 4 of the family struck down on this farm as its first growing season ended. Menace still waited, literally around the corner, in the graveyard of a country church, its back against the timber, just where the terrain began to drop. The creek down there for a while had powered a sawmill, but now ran free, unencumbered, useless. That not to be avoided plot, whose honed stones fixed stare, fanned in the night by passing headlights, struck back the rueful semaphore. There is no safety. I was 10 years old, not 3 miles by the road that ran among the farms, still less if you could have flown, or, just as unthinkable, struck out across country, unimpeded by barbed wire or the mire of feedlots. The legendary habitat of safety lay contained. The memory of the seed leaf in the bean, the blind hand along the banister, the virgin sheath of having lived nowhere but here. Back there in the dining room, last summer's 9-year-old sat crying on the window seat that looked into the garden, rain coursing the pane in streams, the crying on the other side, and it, one element. And sits there still crying, knowing for the first time forever what it was to be heartbroken. The look of exile foreseen, however massive or inconsequential, hurts the same. It's the remembered particulars that differ. How is one to measure the loss of 2 blue spruces, a waterfall of bridal wreath below the porch, the bluebells and Dutchman's breeches my grandmother had brought in from the timber to bloom in the same plot with peonies and lilies of the valley, or out past the pasture where the bull, perennially resentful, stood for the menace of authority. No leering, no snickering in class. An orchard or a grove of willows at the far edge of the wet meadow marking the verge, the western barrier of everything experience had verified. We never thought of going there except in February, when the sap first started working up the pussy willow's wands, the catkins pink underneath, a down of eldritch silver, like the new pigs whose birthing coincided, shredding their crisp cupolas detritus on the debris of foundering snowbanks, brittle as the skin of standing palms we trod on in the meadow. A gouache travesty of calamity, like so many entertainments, the nuptial porcelain, the heirloom crystal vandalized by wanton overshoes, bundled up boredom lolling, while the blue world reeled up past the pussy willow undersides of clouds, latticed by swigging catkins, soon to haze with pollen groat, a glut rum riot, while the broken pond, unsealed, turned to mud, and pullulating came up buttercups, lucent with a mindlessness as total as the romp that ends up wet-mittened, chap-cheeked, fretful beside the kitchen stove, later to roughhouse or whine its way upstairs to bed. Night froze it up again, for the 10,000th time, closing the seals above the breeding ground of frogs, the Acheron of dreadful disappointed Eros stirring up hell, the ticks, the shame, the pathological ambition, anxiety so thick sometimes that nothing breeds there except more anxiety, hampering yet another generation, all the sodden anniversaries of dread, black buttercups that never see daylight, or with loosened chalices drink of the sun. Did we hear them moving wounded from room to room? Or in what shape was it we first perceived it? The unstanched, hereditary thing, working its way along the hollows of the marrow, the worry taking root within like ragweed, the noxious pollen flowering into nothing but sick headaches passed down like an heirloom. When, under the same roof, the memory of a legendary comfort had endowed with what in retrospect would seem like safety, did the rumor of unhappiness arrive. I remember waking a February morning, leprous with frost above the dregs of a half-hearted snowfall, to find the gray world of adulthood everywhere, as though there never had been any other, in that same house I could not bear to leave, where even now the child who wept to leave still sits weeping at the thought of exile.
The Isle of Wight. Toward the end of April, for an idyllic week, the rain stopped, and on the 3rd of May he wrote, "Oh, there is nothing like fine weather, health, books, a contented mind." The ballad's nightmare hillside turned in a burst of bloom into a picnic. Psyche, poor butterfly-winged, put upon immortal, last met within the cold of the starved bedrock, translated, bless her, to shameless daylit alfresco, the flowery upheaval of the marriage bed. Reclaimed thus for Eros, what had he to offer? Rash promises no more. He'd build, he wrote, a sanctuary purely of the mind in some far-off, untrodden region with a window on it, left open every night, not now to frame the stars, if any, but to admit a visitor, prohibited the homelier usages of daylight. A sanctuary of the mind, no more. That summer, cooped with a Bacchic leopard on the Isle of Wight, he wished he never offered it house room. Ask yourself, my love, whether you are not very cruel to have so destroyed my freedom, he wrote. Hyperbole such as he'd often laughed at. But now he let this hot sprite in. The gloom of sundown brought home night after night to that room he said was like a coffin. No ornate access such as had beguiled him. No casement triple-arched as in the night long gone. Those lovers fled into the storm. The framework of escape had shut him in. His sore throat had come back in June. He saw still no prospect of a settled income, could not live with her, but could not now sue love for a retraction. Shut up with phantom rivals in that little room at Shanklin, where was the old wild pleasure of a window opening on a view of water? Sealed off like a poem he might have written once, but couldn't now. Its magic casements closed against the spume and spindrift of a serpentine illusion. Illusion, snared in a brisk running couplet, was his new preoccupation. The day's lame of its phosphorescent moons, its shivering scarlet and skewered emeralds, a weird trophy hung among the totems of his own ambivalence. He almost yearned, he'd written at the start, for metapsychosis as an insect, for just 3 butterfly-winged summer days' intensity. Delight, he called it. Poor worn-out word. Poor psyche. Poor feeble suffix. of doubtful provenance. Voyages. On April 27th, 1932, Hart Crane walked to the travail of the Orizaba, took off his coat, and leaped. At 17, a changeling from among the tire and rubber factories, steel mills, cornfields of the Ohio flatland that had absent-mindedly produced him. On an enthralled first voyage, he looked into the troughed Caribbean and called it home. Back where he'd never been at home, he'd once watched the early morning shift pour down South Main, immigrant Greeks eager to be Americans, and then tried to imagine Porphyro in Akron, Greek for high place. The casement, the aras, the fabricated love nest, the actual sleet storm, the owl, the limping hair, the frozen grass, Keats' own recurring dream of being warm. Who'd been so often cold, he looked with yearning even into blacksmiths' fires. How glorious, he wrote of them, shivering with Stevens, to see the stars put on their glimmering belts. Of what disaster was that chill? Was that salt wind the eminence? The cold, a long time, lifetime snowman did not know. Beside the Neva, Ossip Mandelstrom wrote of the cold, the December fog blurs of Leningrad. Oh, to throw open, he wrote, a window on the Adriatic, a window for the deprived of audience, for the unfree to breathe even the bad air of Moscow. Yet on the freezing pane of perpetuity, that coruscating, cold frame fernery of breath, harsh flower bed of the unheated rooms of childhood, even from the obscurity that sealed it off, his breath, his warmth, he dared declare had already settled. The dream of being warm. Its tattered cargo brought too late to Italy. A mere dire fistful of blood, the sea had soaked his heart through. The voyage, every voyage at the end is cruel. In February 1937, from exile to Flatland, Voronezh, a kind of twin of Akron, Mandelstrom wrote in an almost posthumous whisper of round blue rays, of sails described, scenes parted from as now his voyage to the bottom of a crueler obscurity began, whose end only the false-haired seaweed of an inland shipwreck would register. Untaken voyages, Lethean cold, oh, all but unendured arrivals. Keats' starved stare before the actual, so longed, imagined Bay of Naples. The mind's extinction, night long, sleepless beside the Spanish steps, the prattle of poured water, letters no one would open. Losing track of language. The train leaps toward Italy. The French Riviera falls away in the dark. The rails sing dimeter, shifting to trimeter, a gallopade to a galliard. We sit wedged among strangers. Whatever we once knew, it was never much of each other. Falls away with the landscape. Words fall away. We trade instead in flirting and cigarettes. We're all rapport with strangers. the one with the yellow forelock that keeps falling and being shaken back again, syncopating the dimeter, trimeter, gallopade into galliard, is, it seems, Italian. Recently a pilgrim to the Vaucluse, where Petrarch, to the noise of waterfalls, measured out his strict stanzas, little rooms for turmoil to grow lucid in, for change to put on more durable leaves of bronze, a scapular of marble. A splutter of pleasure at hearing the name is all he needs, and he's off like a racehorse at the Palio, plunging unbridled into recited cadenzas, 3-beat lines interleaving a liquid pentameter. What are words? They fall away into the fleeing dark of the French Riviera as once a shower of bloom, una pioggia di fuori, descended into the lap of the Trecento. Her hair gold and pearl, the grass still warm as when she sat there, 6 centuries gone by. That squandered heartbeat, the Black Plague took her young, now's phosphorized as bronze, as carved laurel. Whatever is left of her is language. And what is language but breath? Leaves, petals fallen or in the act of falling, pollen of turmoil that sifts through the fingers. E conosce. I ask it to keep the torrent of words from ending, to keep anything from ending ever. Anche safro? Yes. He knows, he will oblige. The limpid pentameter gives way to something harsher. Diphthongs condense, take on an edge of bronze. Though I don't understand a word, what are words? Do these concern one Timus, led before she was married, or so one leaf of what's left would have it, to the dark bedroom of Persephone? For so long nowhere at home, either here or there, forever returning and falling back again into the dark of these 10,000 years. The train leaps toward Italy. Words fall away through the dark into the dark bedroom of everything left behind. The unending list of things lost track of who, of where I'm losing track of language. Grassmere. Rainstorms that blacken like a headache where mosses thicken. In the morning smell of jonquils, the stillness of hung fells thronged with the primavera rose noise of waterfalls. Contentment pours in spate from every slope. The lake fills the quay, cups brown, and still it rains. The sheep graze, their black lambs bounce and skitter in the wet. Such weather. One cannot say here why one is still happy. Cannot say except it's both so wild and so cozy, so snugly lush, so English. A run into the ground, complacency nonetheless is given pause here. At Dove Cottage, dark rooms bloom with coal fires. The back stairs escape hatch into a precipitous, small orchard, still opens, bedded cowslips, primroses, fritillaries, checkered, upside down brown tulips still flourish where the great man fled the neighbors. A crank, ye torrents with your strong and constant voice, protest the wrong, he cried, meaning against the Kendal to Windermere Railway. By middle age, a Tory, a somewhat tedious egotist, even his wild oats sown abroad when young. He cannot, his sister had conceded, be so pleasing as my fondness makes him. A coda to the epistolary cry. Oh, Jane, the last time we were together, he won my affection. What gives one pause here? Otherwise, one might not care, as somehow one does. For William Wordsworth is Dorothy. Wednesday, he read me his poem. After dinner, he made a pillow of my shoulder. I read to him, and my beloved slept. The upstairs bedroom where the roof leaked and the chimney smoked, the cool buttery where water runs still voluble under the flagstones, the room she settled into after his marriage to Mary Hutchinson and shared with as the family grew, first one, then two of the children, the newsprint she papered it with for warmth. The circle of domestic tranquility cannot guard her who sleeps single from the Cumbrian cold. Still legible, such was dreamed of place. So long, too much to hope for. It was in winter at Christmas when he was last at Borset. And every day, as soon as we rose from dinner, we used to pace the gravel in the garden till 6 o'clock. And this transcribed for Jane alone from one of William's letters. Oh, my dear, dear sister, with what transport shall I again meet you? With what rapture? The orphan dream they'd entertain that she had named the day of my felicity, to live together under the same roof in the same house, here at Dove Cottage. A quiet night, the fire flutters, and the watch ticks. I hear nothing else save the breathing of my beloved. Spring, when it arrived again, would bring birch foliage, fill me as the bridal veil she'd never wear. Birds singing, the sacred stain of bluebells on the hillsides, fiddleheads uncoiling in the brakes, inside each coil a spine of bronze, priestly, hoary male, clean-limbed ash trees whispered with a foam of pollen, bride-like. Above white moss common, a lone wild cherry candle mirrored in the pewter of the lake. On March 22nd, a rainy day, with William very poorly, resolves were made to settle matters with Annette in France, and that he should go to Mary. On the 27th, after a day fraught with anxiety, a morning of divine excitement, at breakfast, William wrote part of an ode. It was the Intimations. The day after, they took the excitement to Coleridge at Keswick, arriving soaked to the skin. There, after dinner, she had one of her headaches. A bad one's ghastly worst. The packed ganglions, black blood clot. The day of my felicity, curled up inside a single sack with its perfidious twin. the neurasthenic 19th century housemate and counterpart of William's incorrigibly nervous stomach. I do not know what cause it is, he wrote, but during the last 3 years, I have never had a pen in my hand 5 minutes before my whole frame becomes a bundle of uneasiness. To ail here in this place, this hollow formed as though to be the vessel of contentment, of sweet mornings smelling of jonquils, of tranquility at nightfall, of habitual strolls along the lakeshore among the bracken, the old, coiled up agitation glistening, birds singing, the greening birches in their wedding veils, the purple stain of bluebells, attachments uncut knot, so rich, so dark, so dense. A node, the ache still bleeds, still binds, but cannot speak.
An anatomy of migraine. Inquire what consciousness is made of. With Galen, with Leonardo, Leeuwenhoek, or Dr. Tulp. And you find 2 hemispheres, a walnut in a bath of humors, a skull-capped wreath of arteries, a weft of fibrous thoroughfares along the walls of Plato's cave, the cave walls of Lascaux, those shumbling herds, this hollow populace with fissures, declivities, arboreal thicketings with herrings and degrees, this fist-sized flutter, mirror lake of matter, seat of dolor and jubilee, the law of Moses and the giggling underneath the bedclothes of Bedlam and the coronation anthem. All these shut up in a nutshell. Go back. Step past the nadir of whatever happened to divide our reckoning, a fraction of an anti-millennium, a millennium and more ago, and hear Hippocrates declare the brain is double. Since then, as to where in these paired hemispheres the self, with its precarious sense of I am I, with its extremes of possibility, resides, we've come no nearer than Descartes, who thought he'd found it in the pineal teardrop. Now no one's sure what that gland is for. Inquire what consciousness is made of Simone Weil, and she answers, pain, the drag of gravity, the sledge of time, a wretchedness no system can redeem, extreme affliction that destroys the eye. Nothing is worse, she wrote, and knew whereof she wrote, who'd drudged with an ineptitude only the saints would find becoming, in a Renault assembly line, had seen the waste, how small the profit, how many suffer and learn nothing, how, as Kate Croy observed and chose accordingly, deprivation made people selfish, left them robbed of the last rags of character, preyed and put upon, and mired in rancor. She'd seen, was not immune, had been there, had her own cliffs of fall within the skull, headache, driven by whose cringing thud she'd scrupulously noted a craven urge within herself to cause someone, anyone, to suffer likewise. Is the mind divided, as Hippocrates declared the brain is? Did she invite in what all but unhinged her? She'd known well-being, however threaded with crevices, been witness to the white stars' stillness overhead, the white drift of petals from the apple trees, such tranquil spanglings of the retina of time, she could not doubt the universe's fall, that splendors of entity, of grace past meeting face to face, project each one its fearful opposite, its double, as each electron in the universe, its Manichaean antiparticle. In every molecule of every nerve cell, such forces within forces within forces. The marvel is that anyone is ever well, that consciousness is ever other than a frazzled buzz, one long sick headache. My father never gave the name of migraine to that locked-in retribution of the self against who knows what or whom. Fenced brutes, barbed wire and rawhide, fear of a father's anger, mere heredity. His father, to a grandchild seemingly so mild, so equable, had labored, I would one day learn, through that same territory. Days of headache, nights so worry-racked, he thought his mind would go. Heredity. Finally, in a little memoir, impelled by painful rectitude, he'd set down how dread of what had made his by temper hard got out of wedlock, the old conundrum. Who am I? Where did I come from? Twice riddled, learning whose bastard he was, he manfully assumed that surname. Stirred or unstirred, the generation cesspool fills the circle of the wrathful, ventilated, usurps the crawl space. All hell's hand-me-downs hung from the spindle of necessity, each sprung from two, spun out of nothing being, crying from within, I, while time that bears the thinking being toward what it cannot bear impales it. Here is impaled, hinge, mirror image, cleft and crossing place, the hard world not of entity, the one not one at all, but contradiction, know-how and contrariwise, chiasmus through the looking glass, fraternal intertwinings at the very core of battle. So the neurobiological dilemma of the paired, the hemispheric, re-ramifies, bright, dark, left, right, wrong. And so euphoria gives way to spleen. It's obverse as though the cosmos repented of itself, of all those promises, all those placebos, the sun-flooded square, stone blossoming, each canvas seen as a live aperture, a space to step into. Then the usual consequence of waking to another migraine. 3 days in a darkened room, the drastic easement of ergot, derivative of poisoned rye, long known to midwives, prescribed for her too fragile bloodways. Lift the hem of medicine, and you discover torture and placebo twinned, still there. No cure. This happened, was set down. I read the manuscript amazed. We hadn't met. Letters had been exchanged, her driven, bannered penmanship, an army out of Alexander Nevsky, the whips, the wolves, the keening steps, the Russian mother lap her history had been torn from. One day, a parcel came, impeccably hand-wrapped. Inside it, an uncrafted something, 3 sea-winnowed sandstones, a wave-buffed driftwood elbow from the beach at Malibu. I blushed, both flattered and adroitly remonstrated with the manuscript. So many women writing books, their scripts unread, still hoping for some recognition. I'd said I'd look at, not yet opened. I opened it that day, though not before an ounce of Maine Coast beach glass had been wrapped and sent transcontinental reciprocity, and read it through. The migraine on the day she was to fly to Italy, a frame and a foreshadow of that volatile chiaroscuro, a life repeatedly, strenuously, just barely put back in order. That migraine, you too, set her instantly for me with an elite vised by the same splenic coronet. Dorothy Wordsworth, George Eliot, Margaret Fuller, Marx, Freud, Tolstoy, Chopin, Lewis Carroll, Simone Weil, Virginia Woolf, a shattering of shades of forebears and best friends who'd all gone to that hard school. Since Homer peered at Tartarus, we've looked into a gazetteer authenticated hell, a place for meeting with, for hearing yet again, the voices of the dead. The cosmos looped with Bigfoot odysseys set down in moon dust now gives it no place but in the hollow of the skull. That Amazon where no explorer goes except on hands and knees. The straight last entrance to the fields of asphodel where, say, Simone Weil and Virginia Woolf might meet and find no distance, after all, in what they'd finally perceived, what the latter wrote of as reality, beside which nothing matters. She who'd at moments bridged the mind's crevice, lying in bed, mad, and seeing the sunlight quivering like gold water on the wall. I've heard the voices of the dead here and felt through it all, exquisitely happy. Annie, friend by mail, what I would give for time to talk of this. We met just once, at ease at once, walked barefoot on the sands at Malibu, the blue air that afternoon, by some semantic miracle, angelic. Picked up stones, observed the dolphins. A last letter in that script, her unemphatic beauty stanched without a trace. Then, in a hand I did not recognize, cramped, small, precise, one from the husband who'd survived her, dead in her sleep. No warning, but she'd known, had written of, in one half-retracted note, a premonition. I miss her, though our two lives just touch. The torn fabric of some not yet imagined prospect hangs there, streamered, splendid, vague, well-being rainbowed over a lagoon of dark, all that I'm even halfway sure of, marked by that interior cleft, black, white, sweet, sour, a dazzle, dim. I live with shades of possibility, with strangers, friends I never spoke to, with the voices of the dead, the sunlight like gold water on the wall, electron-charged, precarious, all tenuously made of consciousness. Iola, Kansas. Riding all night, the bus half empty, toward the interior among refineries, trellised and turreted illusory cities, the crass, the indispensable wastefulness of oil rigs offshore, of homunculi swigging at the gut of a continent. The trailers, the semis, the vans, the bumper stickers, slogans in day glow invoking the name of Jesus. Who knows what it means? the airwaves, the brand name, the backyard Barbie doll barbecue, graffiti in video, the burblings, the dirges, heart like a rock. I said, Kathy, I'm lost. The scheme is a mess. We've left Oklahoma. It's cattle, sere groves of pecan trees, interspersing the horizonless belch and glare, the alluvium of the auto junkyards. We're in Kansas now. We've turned off the freeway. We're meandering as again night falls among farmsteads, the little towns with the name of a girl on the water tower, the bandstand in the park at the center, the churches alight from within, perpendicular banalities of glass, candy streaked purple, green, and yellow. Who is this Jesus? The strangeness of all there is, whatever it is, growing stranger. We've come to a rest stop. The name of the girl on the water tower is Iola. No video, no vending machines, but Wonder Bread sandwiches. A pie. It's boysenberry. I just baked it today, the woman behind the counter believably says. The innards a purply glue, and I eat it with something akin to reverence. Free refills from the Silex on the hot plate. Then back to our seats. The loud suction of air brakes like a thing alive. And the voices, the sleeping assembly raised as by an agency out of the mystery of the interior to a community. And through some duct in the rock, I feel my heart go out here in the middle of nowhere. The scheme is a mess, to the waste, to the not knowing who or why, and happy. Nothing stays put. The strange and wonderful are too much with us. The protea of the antipodes, a great globed, blazing honeybee of a bloom for sale in the supermarket. We are in our decadence. We are not entitled. What have we done to deserve all the produce of the tropics? This fiery trove, the largesse of it, heaped up like cannonballs, these pineapples Boston crested, standing like troops at attention. These tiers, these balconies of green, festoons grown sumptuous with stoop labor. The exotic is everywhere. It comes to us before there is a yen or a need for it. The greengrocers, uptown and down, are from South Korea. Orchids, opulence by the pailful, just slightly fatigued by the plane trip from Hawaii, are disposed on the sidewalks. Astromerias, freesias, fattened a bit in translation from overseas. Gladioli, likewise estranged from their piercing ancestral crimson, as well as less altered from the original blue cornflower of the roadsides and railway embankments of Europe, these bachelor's buttons. But it isn't the railway embankments their featherweight wheels of cobalt remind me of. It's a row of them among prim colonnades of cosmos, snapdragon, nasturtium, blood silk, red poppies in my grandmother's garden, a prairie childhood, the grassland shorn, overlaid with a grid, unsealed, furrowed, harrowed, and sown with immigrant grasses. Their massive corduroy, their wavering feltings embroidered here and there by the scarlet shoulder patch of camas on a courthouse lawn, by a love knot, a cross stitch of living matter, sown and tended by women, nurturers everywhere, of the strange and wonderful, beneath whose hands what had been alien begins as it alters to grow, as though it were indigenous. But at this remove, what I think of as strange and wonderful, strolling the side streets of Manhattan on an April afternoon, seeing hybrid pear trees in blossom, a tossing vertiginous colonnade of foam up above is the white petal fall, the warm snowdrift of the indigenous wild plum of my childhood. Nothing stays put. The world is a wheel. All that we know that we're made of is motion.
Thank you very much, Corinne Conley, Kay Weissman, Helen Richman, for such a beautiful reading. It was, a full meal, obviously, but we did it and we're on our way. Nothing stays put. The world is a wheel. All that we know that we're made of is motion. So we continue. So thank you once again. And here's our wonderful director, Jennifer Clymer.
Thank you so much for another wonderful poetry hour. I honestly just had to check to make sure I wasn't still on mute. That happens all the time. So I love those moments because it is live. And we are celebrating our 500th episode today. I think a little peek into the life of someone who had her poetry published at an advanced age, a late bloomer, is a wonderful way to focus in on the creativity and how creativity of those with maybe a little more experience is as valid as people straight out of college. So that is what we celebrate here every day. And to have that put into the spotlight today is very meaningful for me. Thank you for doing this, Harry.
Thank you. Thank you all.
So don't go anywhere. Harry, you know my question for you.
Next Tuesday, we have two superb poets, Sandra Giedemann and Irina Mashinsky, to read their poetry.
Oh, that's wonderful. Irina was supposed to be with us a few weeks ago and wasn't feeling well. So I'm so glad you got that rescheduled. Thank you, Harry.